For 68 years, I thought I knew what it meant to be strong. I raised my son alone after his father walked out. I worked double shifts at the elementary school where I taught third grade for 31 years. I fixed the leaky pipes myself, filed my own taxes, drove myself to every single doctor's appointment. I never asked anyone for help, not once. So when Dr. Harmon sat across from me in that small exam room with the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and told me that the results were consistent with early-stage cognitive decline, I didn't cry. I sat very still, the way I used to sit during IEP meetings when a parent said something I disagreed with, and I asked him to explain what that meant exactly. He said my memory tests showed some irregularities. He said it could be the beginning of Alzheimer's. He said we'd want to monitor it closely and schedule follow-up appointments every 3 months. He handed me a pamphlet with a blue cover and a photo of an older woman looking out a window, and I thanked him, folded the pamphlet in half, put it in my purse, and drove home on Route 9 the same way I had driven home from that office building for 40 years. I didn't tell my son right away, not because I was afraid. I want to be clear about that. I didn't tell him because something felt wrong with the diagnosis, but I couldn't prove it yet. I'd had a bad few weeks. I'd mixed up 2 appointments, lost my keys twice, repeated myself in a conversation with my neighbor Harriet. Enough for Dr. Harmon to flag it, but I knew my own mind, and my mind felt like my mind. Tired, yes. Grieving, still, after 2 years, over losing my sister Elaine, but not broken. I decided to wait. I scheduled the follow-up. And in the meantime, I said nothing. My son's name is Connor. He's 41, works in commercial real estate in Hartford, married a woman named Brooke 7 years ago. They have a nice house in West Hartford, 2 cars, no children yet, though Brooke mentions it less and less now. I love my son. I want to say that clearly because everything else I'm about to tell you will make that complicated, and I need you to understand that loving someone and seeing them clearly are 2 different things. I loved Connor. I just hadn't really seen him in a long time. He called me on a Tuesday evening, about 2 weeks after my appointment. I was in the kitchen making a pot of chicken soup, the real kind, with the carcass and the celery tops and the peppercorns, and I almost didn't answer because my hands were wet. But I dried them and picked up. "Mom," he said, "Brooke and I want to come down this weekend, talk about some things." I asked what things. He said, "Just, with everything going on, we just want to check in." I hadn't told him about the appointment. I still don't know how he found out. Later I'd learned that Dr. Harmon's office had called the emergency contact number on file, which Connor had insisted I add to my chart 3 years ago after I had a minor procedure, and he said it was just responsible. I'd agreed without thinking much about it. A small thing, a form, a box checked. I didn't know then how much weight a small thing could carry. They came on Saturday. Brooke brought a lemon pound cake from a bakery in West Hartford that I recognized immediately. They wrap it in white paper with a gold sticker. Very tasteful. $32. I've seen them in the case when I've driven past. She set it on the counter and hugged me and said I looked wonderful. Connor hugged me longer than usual. Held on a little too long, the way you hold on to someone you're already rehearsing missing. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped Connor with his homework every night from 2nd grade through his junior year of high school. The same table where I'd told him his father wasn't coming back. The same table where I'd signed the papers that finally paid off this house in 2019. My table. My kitchen. My house. Connor set his phone face down between us, which he always does when he wants to seem attentive, and he said, "So Dr. Harmon's office left a message for me." I said I knew. He said, "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" I said I'd been processing it. Brooke reached over and covered my hand with hers. Her nails were very clean and very oval-shaped and a pale blush pink. "We just want to make sure you're taken care of," she said. "That's all this is." Connor nodded. "We've been doing some research. There are some really beautiful memory care facilities, I said. I do not have memory problems, Connor. He looked at Brooke. That look, the kind of look where the whole conversation has already happened between two people before they walked in the door, and now they're just delivering the result. The doctor said there were irregularities. He said we would monitor it. That is not the same thing. Connor leaned forward and said, Mom, you left the stove on twice last month. Mrs. Hanley next door told me. I looked at him. I thought about the stove. I did leave it on once, the back left burner, the small one, for about 20 minutes after I moved the pot. I didn't remember a second time. I thought about whether I should push back on that, and then I thought about the look he had just shared with Brooke, and something quiet and cold settled into my chest. I said, You've been checking up on me. He said, I've been worried about you. You've been talking to my neighbors about me. Mrs. Hanley called me, Mom. She was concerned. I wanted to ask when exactly Mrs. Hanley had gotten Connor's phone number and how long the two of them had been having conversations about me without my knowledge, but I looked at my son's face, the face I had watched go from infant to toddler to teenager to man, and I said, Let me think about what you said. And I poured everyone more coffee, and I told them the pound cake was delicious, and an hour later they drove back to West Hartford. I sat at the table for a long time after they left. There was a second follow-up appointment 6 weeks later, this time with a neurologist named Dr. Patel over at the medical center. She was thorough. She was kind. She ran the full battery. Memory tests, language tests, a brain MRI, blood work. And at the end, she sat across from me and said that in her professional opinion, my results did not support a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease or any other dementia. She said Dr. Tummett Harmon had been right to flag the original irregularities given the context, but that the more comprehensive picture showed normal cognitive aging for a woman my age, compounded by grief and disrupted sleep. She recommended a sleep study, a grief counselor, and come back in a year. I drove home on Route 9, and I sat in my car in the driveway for a few minutes. The maple tree in the front yard was just starting to turn. The gutters needed cleaning. The third porch step had a soft spot I'd been meaning to call someone about. I thought, I could call Connor right now. Tell him what Dr. Patel said. Put this to rest. And then I thought about the look. The look he'd shared with Brooke before he mentioned the memory care facilities. The way it had moved between them quick and certain, like something decided. I thought about Mrs. Hanley and Connor's phone number. I thought about beautiful memory care facilities in a voice that had already made up its mind. I did not call Connor. I called my niece instead. Her name is Laurel. She's Elaine's youngest, 29 years old, teaches elementary school now, same grade I used to teach, which is something that made Elaine so happy she cried when she found out. Laurel had been coming over every other Sunday since Elaine died, bringing groceries I didn't ask for and sitting with me at this same table, sometimes talking for 3 hours, sometimes barely talking at all. She never mentioned the word Alzheimer's. She never mentioned my stove or my keys or anything Mrs. Hanley might have observed from across the hedge. I told Laurel what Dr. Patel had said, that I was fine, that the first diagnosis had been overcautious. Laurel said, "Oh, Aunt Bev, I knew it. I knew it." I said, "I'm going to tell Connor soon, but I want to do something first, and I need you to keep this between us." She said, "Okay." I said, "I'm going to stay quiet for a while. Not lie, just not correct the assumption. And I want to watch what happens." There was a pause on the line. Then Laurel said, "How long?" I said I wasn't sure. Enough time to see what I needed to see. She was quiet again. Then, "Okay, I'm with you. My name is Beverly. Beverly Ann Caldwell, née Marshall. I was born in Concord, New Hampshire in 1956. I have owned my house on Birch Street in Glastonbury, Connecticut for 32 years. I have a pension from the school district, a 403(b), that my financial advisor at Raymond James has managed conservatively since 2008, and a modest savings account at a local credit union. The house is paid off. I am not wealthy, but I am not nothing. And I had never, in 68 years, let someone tell me what I was capable of without pushing back. But there is a time to push back loudly and a time to push back quietly. I had learned that lesson in 31 years of parent-teacher conferences. Connor started calling more often after that Saturday, every few days, just to check in. The calls felt careful. He'd ask me what I'd had for dinner, had I driven anywhere, was I keeping my calendar up. He started sending little notes through an app, reminders, he called them. Mom, don't forget your Wednesday appointment. Mom, I left a voicemail for Mrs. Hanley to check in on you. I answered his questions. I thanked him for the reminders. I kept my voice warm and a little slower than usual just by a fraction. Enough to feed whatever story he was already telling himself. I was not proud of this. I want to say that. I lay awake some nights feeling sick about it, wondering if I was doing something cruel. But then I would think about those memory care brochures he'd left on my table. He'd slip them out of his bag when he thought I wasn't looking. And the sick feeling would shift into something steelier. About a month after my clean bill of health from Dr. Brodo, Patel, Connor, and Brooke came for dinner. I made pot roast. Connor brought wine. Brooke brought a small succulent in a ceramic pot, which is a thing people give when they don't know what to bring. We had a nice time. It felt almost normal. After dinner, Connor helped me clear the plates, unusual. And when he came back to the table, he set down a manila folder and said, Mom, I've been working on some things, just to help with the logistics. I wiped my hands on my dish towel and sat down. Inside the folder was a packet of papers, a durable power of attorney form already filled out with Connor's name in the relevant blanks. A simplified summary, his word of my financial accounts, which he had apparently compiled from documents I'd shared with him over the years, and a one-page letter he'd written that described in careful neutral language his concerns about my ability to manage my affairs independently. I read every page. I took my time. Neither Connor nor Brooke spoke while I read, which told me they had rehearsed the silence. When I finished, I set the papers down and looked at my son. I said, Where did you get my account numbers? He said he'd gotten them from a statement he'd found on my desk when he was helping me organize after Elaine died. I said, You took information from my desk. He said, I was helping you. You took information from my desk, Connor, without asking me. Brooke cut in smoothly. Bev, we're not trying to take over. This is just a safety net. Lots of families do this. With the diagnosis, there is no diagnosis, I said. Dr. Harmon flagged something. It was followed up. The neurologist found nothing. Connor looked up sharply. What neurologist? I said I had sought a second opinion. When? Why didn't you tell me? I looked at him across the table, my house, and I said, Because I needed to understand my situation before I talked to other people about it. He started to say something. I held up one hand, the way I used to hold up my hand at the front of a third-grade classroom when the noise got to be too much, and he stopped. I said, I'm going to hold on to these papers. I appreciate that you made them, and I would like some time. He nodded slowly. Brooke looked at her succulent on the counter. They left around 9. I sat with the folder for a long time. I read the power of attorney again, thinking about what it would mean to sign it. Connor would have authority over my financial decisions, over my healthcare decisions, over, in practice, almost everything. All of it entirely legal, entirely normal, entirely something that happens in families every single day. All of it assuming I was not capable of deciding these things for myself. The next morning, I called an attorney. Her name is Ellen Marsh. She's been in Glastonbury for 20 years, does estate planning, semi-retired, but she still sees a few clients. I'd met her years ago at a school board meeting. I explained the situation. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, Come in Thursday at 2. I did not tell Connor I was seeing an attorney. Over the next several weeks, I learned a great deal. I learned that my estate plan, which I had drawn up in 2006 and never updated, named Connor as sole beneficiary for everything. The house, the retirement accounts, the savings. I learned that this made sense in 2006 when Connor was young and I was 50 and my sister was alive. I learned that it made rather less sense now. I spent those weeks paying very close attention. Connor called twice a week, always asking about my routine. One Sunday, he stopped by unannounced and walked through the kitchen. I noticed him noting the stove, the pill organizer on the counter, the stack of mail I hadn't opened yet. Brooke texted me links, articles about planning ahead, and family conversations about aging from websites that all felt pointed in the same direction. Then there was the phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. It was a Wednesday. Connor had come by to help me with the yard. He'd shown up with a rake and spent about 40 minutes on the leaves while I made us lunch. He went out to his car to get something and his phone, which he'd left on the kitchen counter, lit up. I wasn't trying to hear anything. I was right there, slicing tomatoes. The kitchen window was open to the front, and his voice carried. He was talking to someone, I think a colleague, from the Cadence, and he said the house alone is probably worth $650, maybe $7 if the market holds. Plus whatever she's got in the retirement accounts. Yeah, it's a lot sitting there. And with her situation the way it is. He paused, listening. No, I think we can move on it before the end of the year. Easier while things are still, before it gets more complicated. He came back inside 40 seconds later and asked if I needed help with anything. I handed him the tomatoes and said, "Can you slice those? My hand is a little tired." I kept my voice perfectly even. I drove to Ellen's office the following Tuesday and I sat down across from her and I told her everything, including the phone call. She listened. Then she said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to make sure what I've built goes where I want it to go." We worked together for 3 weeks. I updated my will. I changed my beneficiary designations on the retirement accounts. I established a revocable living trust, which Ellen explained would give me control during my lifetime and simplify the transfer of my assets when I was gone. I also set up a separate, irrevocable transfer of a portion of my assets to Laurel, the equivalent of what I had been setting aside mentally for Elaine, money I'd always intended to share with her, now redirected to her daughter who had shown up every other Sunday without being asked. I also updated my durable power of attorney. I did not name Connor. When everything was complete and the documents were signed and filed, I called my son and told him I'd like him and Brooke to come for dinner on Saturday. He said yes immediately. I could hear in his voice that he thought I was ready to sign the papers he'd left. I made lasagna. I served it with garlic bread and a green salad. We talked about his work, Brooke's work, a trip they were thinking about taking to Portugal. I asked good questions. I was a good host. After dessert, the remains of a pie Laurel had brought over the previous Sunday, I got up, went to my desk in the corner of the living room, and came back to the table with my own folder. I set it in front of Connor and sat down. He opened it. He read the first page, which was a summary letter from Ellen's office describing the updated estate plan. I watched his face. He got very still in the way that people get still when something surprises them so completely that their body doesn't know what expression to make. He looked up. He said, "Mom." I said, "Let me explain." I told him everything then. The appointment with Dr. Harmon. The decision to wait. The appointment with Dr. Patel and what she found. The weeks I had spent watching and listening. The phone call I hadn't been meant to hear. I told it all plainly. The way I had learned to describe difficult things in 31 years of talking to parents about their children. Clearly, calmly, without softening so much that the truth got lost. When I finished, the kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. The clock on the wall above the stove said 8:47. Brooke said, "Bev, that's not what that phone call was." I looked at her. I said, Brooke, I was standing at that counter. I heard every word. Connor put his hand flat on the folder. He said I was looking out for you. That's all. I was scared. I looked at my son for a long moment. I thought about the boy at the homework table and the teenager who used to make me laugh until I cried with his impressions of the evening news anchors, and the 23-year-old who sat in this same kitchen the day his first real relationship ended and let me put my arm around him for half an hour without saying anything. I held all of that. Then I said, Connor, if you were scared, the thing to do was tell me you were scared, not compile my account numbers, not call my neighbor, not bring papers to my table and ask me to sign away my independence. He was quiet. I am not confused, I said. I am not diminished. I am tired, and I miss my sister, and I am 68 years old, which apparently makes some people assume I am no longer capable of being in charge of my own life. I want you to understand that I am. Completely. Brooke was looking at her hands. Connor was looking at her hands. Connor was looking at mine. I said, I still love you. That is not in question. But I needed you to know what I heard and what I did about it and where things stand. And I needed you to hear it from me while I am sitting right here, clear-eyed and fully present, so that there is no version of this where anyone gets to say I didn't understand what I was saying. He nodded. Very slowly. His jaw was tight. After a while, he said, I'm sorry, Mom. I said, I know. That was 6 months ago. Things between Connor and me are different now. Not broken, I don't think, but different. He calls less, and when he calls, there's a carefulness in his voice that wasn't there before. I don't know yet if we'll find our way back to something easier. I hope so. I hold the hope the way I hold a lot of things at my age, at arm's length. Honestly, without forcing it. Laurel still comes every other Sunday. Last week, she brought ingredients and we made Elaine's lemon cake from memory, just the two of us, reconstructing it from what we each remembered, adjusting as we went. It didn't come out quite right, but we ate it anyway, laughing at how close we'd gotten to something we couldn't quite hold. My name is Beverly Caldwell, and I own my house on Birch Street, and I know exactly where my keys are, and I made that lasagna from scratch, and I am nobody's cautionary tale. I just needed everyone else to understand that. I've had a lot of time to think about what happened. About Connor, about those brochures, about the phone call I heard through an open kitchen window while I was slicing tomatoes, about whether I did the right thing, or whether there was a kinder way to handle all of it. I still don't have a clean answer. What I know is this: the way people treat you when they think you can't fight back, that tells you something true. Not the whole truth, maybe. People are complicated. Connor loves me. I genuinely believe that, but love without honesty isn't enough to protect you, and at 68 years old, I stopped having the patience to pretend otherwise. I spent 31 years teaching 8-year-olds, and here is what I learned in those years. Character isn't what people do when someone is watching. Character is what they reach for first when no one is. Connor's first reach was to compile my account numbers. His first call was to my neighbor, not to me. His first instinct was to manage the situation, not to ask me how I was doing. That is not a small thing. That is actually the whole thing. And Laurel, Elaine's daughter, 29 years old, brings groceries I never asked for. Her first reach was just to show up. Every other Sunday. No agenda. No folder. No power of attorney forms. Just her, and whatever she thought to bring, and 2 or 3 hours of sitting at my kitchen table. She did that before she knew anything about the diagnosis scare. She did it while Connor was researching memory care facilities. That contrast is not something I manufactured, it's just what happened. I think about cause and effect a lot now, in the plain non-mystical sense. Not fate, not punishment from some higher order. Just the ordinary logic of choices and consequences playing out over time. Connor made choices across many years, Small ones mostly. The visit that was really about the house, the question about the investment accounts tucked into a conversation about the weather, the way he'd stop by and look at things without asking. None of those choices were dramatic. Individually, none of them would have meant much. But they added up to a pattern, and patterns have weight. They shape the kind of trust that either exists or doesn't when the moment comes that actually matters. The moment that mattered was my kitchen table on a Saturday in October. And the trust wasn't there. That's not fate. That's arithmetic. What I hope people hear in this is not a story about a bad son. I really don't think that's what it is. I think it's a story about what happens when we stop treating the people closest to us as full human beings with full inner lives, when we start seeing them as situations to be managed instead of people to be known. Connor stopped knowing me somewhere along the way. He knew my account balances. He didn't know that I'd already gotten the second opinion. He didn't know that I was fine, because he hadn't asked in a way that left room for me to answer honestly. I'm not exempt from this. I stayed silent longer than I needed to, and some of that cost us. I could have called him after Dr. Patal's appointment and given him the chance to be relieved. I chose to watch instead. I made my own calculation and I have to own it. What I hold on to is this. I stayed true to myself when it would have been easier not to. I didn't sign those papers. I didn't defer to someone else's story about who I was and what I was capable of. I kept my own counsel until I understood my situation, and then I acted on it. Not out of anger, or not only out of anger, but out of a clarity that took me 68 years to earn and that I am not going to give away quietly. My name is Beverly Caldwell. I know where my keys are. I made that lasagna from scratch. And I am nobody's cautionary tale.